that little church on Liberty Hill. Come praise the Lord, let your cup be filled. Raise your voices and we'll sing. Let God's freedom ring from that little church on Liberty Hill.
Go ahead and open up to Matthew chapter 24. Matthew chapter 24, and if you are an overachiever, you can go ahead and open up to Mark 13 and Luke 21. But we're going to camp out in Matthew 24. Mark and Luke say basically the same thing. I might refer to one or the other a bit here and there, but we're going to be in Matthew. We're actually going to focus on Matthew probably for the next 2 or 3 weeks because Jesus is about to launch into some explanation on end time stuff. And I know that that may not be a very popular topic. Oh, there should have been laughs there. I just threw that one to you, right? Because how long have we been spending, as I said, with Dr. Krause on Sunday nights in the end times? It's been a great study. It's always something people enjoy looking at, and here the disciples are going to ask Jesus a question, and he's going to give some answers, and it's going to start looking at some stuff, and we're going to dig in. Now, I'm probably not going to get as deep into anything specific as has been gone into by Dr. Krause. Maybe we might one day do a study on that as well, but we're going to get the 30,000-foot bird's eye view at this. And so just to recap what has happened as we're going along through the life of Jesus, every time I'm thinking like, this is it, we're like right at the end. We're almost done. And then I remember that there's still many, many more chapters left, still a lot more things to do. Even though in the life of Christ, the cross is right around the corner, there's still a lot of things that happen between now and then that happen afterwards as well. So I'd say we're probably about 3/4 of the way through, 2/3, 3/4 of the way through our journey through the Gospels. We're going to hit a point towards the end where the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, don't address a lot, but then John goes on and on and on and on about some stuff. And so we'll be in John for a little bit towards the end. Okay, but what has happened is we're in Holy Week. Jesus has entered Jerusalem. You had the triumphal entry where the Pharisees said, you need to tell your disciples to quit praising you. And he said, you understand, if they're silent, the rocks are going to cry out and declare who I am. And so then he comes in and he's teaching with authority, and he's doing miracles, and the religious leaders not liking that very much because he's very popular with the crowds, looking for a way to undermine him, so they come to try to challenge him, and every question they give, he answers, not only answers, but flips it around so that they are the bad guys, which they are because they're rejecting God and they're rejecting God's Messiah. And then because they can't get him on questions, they can't trip him up theologically, they just decide they're going to outright have him killed. Because the idea is if they can find something that Rome decides they need to step in, then the crowd will understand that he can't be the Messiah because the Messiah is supposed to be greater than Rome. But if Rome can arrest him, he must not be the Messiah. Which is what's going to end up happening and why the crowd can one day be praising him and the next day be yelling for his death on the cross. But that's not where we're at quite yet. The day has ended. He is done with the teaching, and they are heading back home. As you probably well know, whenever Jesus is in the area of Jerusalem, he tends to stay with Mary and Martha and Lazarus over there in Bethany. And on the way to Bethany is the Mount of Olives, and that's where we're going to find ourselves today. So in Matthew 24, we're going to start in verse 1. I'm going to talk a little bit about the temple, and then they're going to move off to the Mount of Olives, where they're going to ask him some more questions. We're just going to go through this, walk our way through it, talking about some stuff as we go. In verse 1, it says, Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, Do you not see all these things? Assuredly I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down. So they're like, look at these buildings. You see this temple, isn't this thing great? And Jesus says, yeah, you see all this? There's not going to be one stone that will not be thrown down. Now what's interesting is you stop and think, if you rewind back to whenever the religious leaders were saying, you need to tell your disciples to quit praising you. And he said, if they're silent, the stones will cry out. Now, you could take that to mean just like the rocks laying on the ground, but the fact that the stones of the temple are going to declare the truth of Christ through the fulfillment of prophecy. Because right here, as he is saying, do you see all of this? That's going to be torn down. He is prophesying something that is going to happen. This right here, recorded in all three Gospels of the Synoptic Gospels, is a verifiable prophecy. Jesus said it beforehand, and later it happened. This takes place in 70 AD, whenever the Roman general Titus, who later becomes emperor, sieges the city of Jerusalem, and the destruction brought against Jerusalem is so bad, you can actually see marks of it today if you go over there. And in that attack, in that assault, they destroy the temple. Now all that is left of the temple is what is over there, what's known as the Wailing Wall, and that's not even part of the temple, it's part of the retaining wall that built up the mound that the temple sat on. So severe was the destruction. This is actually the reason why a lot of skeptics will say that the Gospels have to be dated later than 70 AD. Because Jesus foretold it, and well, everyone knows miracles aren't possible. There's no way to know the future, wink, wink. So of course it has to have been done later. That's the only way they can make sense that the Gospel authors knew it was going to happen. Of course, we know better, because Jesus is the Son of God. He knew he could foretell the future, and he told it, and it came to pass. Just a quick note, recap for those who were here Wednesday. We've been following the Case for Christ. We've started that. We're actually really only about one real meaty lesson into it, so please come join. But one thing we were talking about was the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Are they reliable accounts of history? And one of the things that goes into that is the dating, the fact that they were so early, so close to the time of the actual events. And we talked about the way that you can date the Gospels, and the way that I look at this, and the way a lot of other Christian scholars look at this, is you have the book of Acts, right? We're talking about the Gospel, so of course we're going to go to the book of Acts. Like, that makes sense. The book of Acts is Luke part 2, if you didn't know. Okay, so in the book of Acts, you have basically three main characters. Paul is the big one. Peter plays a massive part in there also. And James, the brother of Jesus, is a leader in the church of Jerusalem. All three of those guys play a prominent role in the book of Acts. All three of them, we know from other historical sources, are martyred in the mid to early 60s AD. So at least 5 years before the temple's destroyed. Now, why doesn't Luke record the martyrdom of these key people in the church? We know that other people get martyred, and he records them. Why not the most prominent figures in the story, in the account that he is giving? Because it hadn't happened yet. Why would he not record the destruction of the temple? It's like you're writing a history of New York, and you just failed to mention 9/11. Right? It's going to be in there if it had already happened. So the conclusion is it had not happened yet. Well, if the book of Acts is completed before these guys are martyred in the mid-60s, it must have been written early 60s, 62, 63. Well, it's part 2 to the Gospel of Luke, so therefore Luke would have had to have been written before that. So late 50s, maybe around 60. It's also well known, scholars will say, that Luke most likely used the Gospel of Mark as one of his sources, so Mark would have had to have been written before that. And so in this way, you end up with at least latest date, the late 50s, mid to late 50s, that the Gospels are being written, except there's more. You have in the book of 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about the Last Supper, or the Lord's Supper, which we will later be observing today. And in that, he word for word quotes the Gospel of Luke. Well, we know that 1 Corinthians was written in 54 AD. If he's quoting the Gospel of Luke, then it had to have been written before that. So if you have the early 50s for Luke, but Luke used Mark, so now you got Mark pushed back to the late 40s. So here you have even earlier dates for the Gospels, decades before the temple is destroyed, recording that Jesus said it's going to happen. That is verified prophecy. Just a little interesting note about the temple. Herod the Great had built or renovated, I guess you could say, this particular temple. In 19 BC, because he was very egotistical and wanted to have great, wonderful things to his glory and monuments to his greatness, he decided to renovate the temple. Because you remember, the first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then whenever the Jews returned from exile, they rebuilt the temple, but it was kind of a shadow of its former self. It was there, it was functional, but it was nothing grandeur like Solomon had built. And so Herod comes along and says, I'm going to restore that grandeur, and he rebuilds the temple. The outer court measured 500 by 300 yards. That's a big temple. It was bordered by walls of massive white stones, some of which were 16 feet long and 3 or 4 feet high. Massive white stone. On the top of these were magnificent covered walkways, richly carved wooden ceilings. And it would have been quite a sight to see from afar, especially, say, the Mount of Olives, which is right across from the city. So from the Mount of Olives, you would look and you would see Jerusalem laid out, and right there in the middle of it would be the crown jewel, the temple, sitting atop the Temple Mount in white, sparkling stone, reflecting the sun's light and all the other ornamentations. It would have been quite the sight to see. And that's where Jesus and the disciples are. So as they're leaving, they comment, hey, look at this building, isn't this stuff great? And Jesus says, yeah, it's all going to be torn down. And then they go out to the Mount of Olives, where they then can look and see the temple. And so now they ask him. Now they ask him a question, verse 3. Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? You would think that, here we are 3.5 years in, that they would have all the details and know all the answers. I mean, they've been walking and studying and learning with this guy for 3 years. You'd think they'd have it down, but they've still got questions. Remember, they're expecting to see in their minds, they're still struggling with the fact that they expect Messiah to set up the kingdom. Here he is. He's the king who is to come, who's going to reestablish the nation of Israel, who's going to reign over the nations of the world with Israel on top. When is this going to happen? Because so far he's been talking about going to Jerusalem, being betrayed and turned over to the religious leaders, being turned over and crucified. Well, that doesn't sound like a king setting up his kingdom. Now he's talking about the temple being destroyed. Okay, they know Jesus is the Messiah, so they're saying, Lord, when is this going to happen? Because the things you're telling us sounds like it's not now, so when will it come? Verse 4. And Jesus answered and said to them, take heed that no one deceives you. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and will deceive many. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines, pestilences, earthquakes in various places. And all of these are the beginning of sorrows. Then they will deliver you up to the tribulation and kill you, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended, will betray one another, and will hate one another. And then many false prophets will rise up and deceive many. And because of lawlessness will abound, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures to the end shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come. Probably not quite what they were expecting to hear. They were thinking like next Thursday, maybe, another month or two, sometime in the next year or so. Well, when's this going to happen? Jesus is saying, hey, look, there's going to be all these other things that are going to go on first. Now, one thing I think we need to understand, and the way some people take this is not a checklist of things that are going to occur. This is not like, okay, if the end is coming, let's see if we've got it. Do we have wars? Check, we got wars. Do we got false Christ? Yeah, we got those. Right? We got famines and pestilences. Yeah, we got those. Okay, the end must be. No, that's not what he's giving. This is the general flow of history that occurs between his first coming and his second coming. In verse 6, he says, whenever all these things happen, the end is not yet. You're going to hear about wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. Verse 8, he says, these are the beginnings of the sufferings. Later, he's going to go more into the tribulation and what's going to happen there. But these are the beginnings. Wars, false Christs, famines, pestilences, earthquakes, martyrs, false prophets, people turning against one another. All of these things have been happening through all of human history. Now, it appears there will be an increase in it, in these things as the time comes. I remember, it was a few months ago, Dr. Krause was talking about statistics on earthquakes and how you actually see there seems to be a rise in earthquake activity over the last century or whatever it was. That even though the majority of the world is being lifted out of poverty, that you actually look and the rate of famines, according to UN statistics, that's what was shared, that, you know, there's areas of famine and things has been increasing. So there does appear to be that things are going to increase. But one thing I want to say, and I've said this before, people like to get worked up over things, but you have to stop and remember, in several different places where it's talking about the end times coming, it says that it will be as in the days of Noah or as in the days of Lot. And what was society like in the days of Noah or in the days of Lot? Well, in the case of the day of Noah, it explicitly tells us what it was like. That the thoughts of man were only evil continually. Now, as we look around and watch the news and the things we see going on in the world, can we say that that's what the world is like today? Only evil continually? Well, there's a lot of evil, and it happens pretty consistently, but I don't think we're at the point of only evil continually. That's my personal take on it, that I'm not expecting this is as bad as it's going to. Every generation tends to think this is it, can't possibly get worse, and you should never say that. I remember I was working at a place and it was forbidden to use the word easy, right? Where it's like, we got a job to go do. Oh, that's going to be easy. Oh, you had to say it, didn't you? Right? And that's what happens. It's like, it couldn't possibly get worse. Don't say that, because just wait, and it does. There are things that are going on in society today that if you would have said 5 years ago that it was coming, you would have got laughed at. There's no way people would think that. There's no way people would do that. Yet here we are. But I still don't think that we're at a point of only evil continually. I don't think we're quite there. Now, I do want to say a word about this. Because the things that Jesus has described that is going to happen, that's going to kind of be the ramp up to the return of Christ, these are some pretty bad things. I mean, you have false Christs and false prophets. I mean, just con men deceiving people, that's pretty bad. But wars, famines, pestilences, people turning against one another, betraying one another. And this brings to mind, so there's an acceleration of, a proliferation of evil. And in my experience, one of the major things that critics of, skeptics of Christianity bring against the Bible, bring against God, bring against Christ is what is referred to as the problem of evil or the problem of pain. They say that this good God supposedly couldn't exist if there is evil and suffering in the world. But Jesus seems to be saying there's going to be quite a bit of that going on. Here's basically how the argument would go, that God is omniscient, he's all-knowing, that he's omnipotent, he's all-powerful, and that he's good, he's all good, that God doesn't do evil. But if God exists, if such a God exists, then evil would not exist, because if he's all-knowing, he knows what would happen. If he's all-powerful, he could stop it from happening. If he's all good, he would want to stop it from happening. However, they argue evil does indeed exist, and so therefore, such a God could not exist. Now, there are reasons why this fails logically as an argument. Just rationally, it doesn't stand up. And there are reasons why we as Christians should not be disturbed by the reality of evil in the world. Not that we shouldn't be bothered by evil. Obviously, we who are walking in the Spirit, our consciences are burdened for the darkness and the suffering that we see around us. But it should not shake our faith. Whenever we experience evil, see it or experience it, it should not be something to which we are then motivated to shake our fist at the heavens as if it were God's fault. So how does it fail logically? Let me just give this fairly quick, because philosophers have long known this. It has not been a serious argument. In order to say that if God exists then evil can't, you must be able to show that God would not have a morally sufficient reason to allow evil. And there is no possible way you could know that. You're not all-knowing. I'm not all-knowing. There are so many intricate factors that go in the world that you couldn't possibly know whether or not God has a good reason. And so you logically cannot argue that. And then there are what other philosophers and theologians will offer that are called theodicies. They are answers for why there is evil in the world. There's the idea of free will. The reason there's evil in the world is because God gave mankind free agency, that we're able to make choices, good or bad, and we choose bad. That's why there's evil in the world, because we chose so. But free will is a rather important and valuable feature of life. How many times we tell ourselves over and over again in art, in books, in movies, and music about the wonder and beauty of free will? A lot of times in kind of comical fashions. You ever seen, there was an older one, they did a remake, Stepford Wives? You ever see that movie? Where it's a bunch of guys in a town, they decide they want to get rid of their wives, so they replace their wives with robots that do everything they want and just are always wonderful and complimenting and always tell them what they want to hear and do what they want to have done. Right? And then the main character is like, well, I don't want that wife. I actually want a real relationship with a real person, real love, who's really loving me back, even when I want the good with the bad. And we tell ourselves those stories over and over again. If there's any sci-fi nerd kind of people out there, it's a very common story in a lot of different movies where you'll have the future and someone has discovered, oh, well, the problem with mankind is all these feelings we have, so we got to get rid of that. And so what ends up happening is now everybody is just emotionless little robots going through life, not really choosing to be able to do anything. They're just kind of following their little track and the hero of the story are the ones who say, no, we won't live like that. And, the pain and the suffering is worth being free. And so they set society free. And we tell ourselves these stories over and over and over again. Look at the crowd I'm dealing with. Any Garth Brooks fans? Right? The dance. I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Right? Because if I'd have known, I could have missed the pain, but I would have had to miss the dance. We tell ourselves this over and over again, that the pain is worth the freedom, that there are rewards that come from freedom. There's the idea of soul building, that the reason God allows there to be adversity and hardness in life is because as we overcome it, we grow and we mature. There's the idea that there is a greater good, that this negative thing will happen now, but it's going to set off a series of events where something greater is going to happen down the line. Personally, I think that all three are true, and we can't know in any given situation which one or ones are at play. So it's not logically possible to say that evil therefore disproves God. Quite the opposite, actually, because in order to have evil, you must have good. Right? You can have good without evil. You cannot have evil without good. I think it was C.S. Lewis who said, the shadows prove the sunshine. And if you're going to have evil, that means you have to have good. And if you're going to have good, you have to have a source of good. You have to have God. If you're going to have a moral law, you have to have a moral law giver. So actually, the fact that there's evil in the world proves that God exists. But there is evil in the world. So how do we make sense of it? I mean, we can talk logic, and we can make sense of it, just, okay, so God is good, and that's it, all that. But it's real. It happens. It hurts. So how do we make sense of it? Do we just say, well, the Lord works in mysterious ways? All right, moving on. Well, we can try. He does. But realistically, that doesn't get the job done. A few things that we know about God and about life that should help shape our perspective on this. There's going to be three, and because we're Baptist, I'll make them all start with the same letter. It's going to be dominion, depravity, and deliverance. Dominion, depravity, and deliverance. First thing is dominion. God created the world, and he said, hey, now let's make mankind. Let us make them in our image. In our likeness, male and female, he made them. And what did he say? Immediately after creating mankind, he says that he gave us dominion over the earth. That we were to have dominion and subdue it. God made a perfect world free of evil, gave mankind dominion over the earth. Part of that dominion was that we were to bring order into the disorder. See, we tend to sometimes think of the whole earth as like the Garden of Eden. The Bible's pretty clear. He created the Garden of Eden, but the rest of the world was wilderness, untamed. And the command to mankind was to go into the untamed earth, extending Eden. Go out there in the wilderness and make it look like Eden. That was the command. Order into disorder. We're supposed to be people who overcome darkness, who overcome chaos, who overcome the disorder and the danger, not who are spared from it. That wasn't our charge. Avoidance of pain is not our primary concern. Our primary concern is to overcome, not to escape. Second, we have depravity. As I'm sure you're all aware, even though you're kind of swell, decent folks I enjoy knowing, we're not all that good. That's one of those things that's kind of hard for some people to say. It's popular in our culture. No, we're all good. You're all basically good. Oh, sure, you make mistakes, but, people, we're basically good. Are we? Are we? Sure, let's take a little bit of time. Let's do the quiz. You want to do the quiz? There's some people shaking their head. No, let's not do it. Let's do it. You ever told a lie? You ever tell a lie? If your hand's not up, you're telling one right now. Right? Okay. Let's see, another 10 commandments. Blasphemy. You ever blaspheme? Blasphemy? Well, you already told me you're a liar. Come on. Right? You ever steal anything? You ever steal anything? All right, what do you call people who steal things? Thieves. Okay, so there's 3 out of 10. We've already admitted that we're lying, thieving, blasphemers. Do we want to go on? Can we stop there? Right? Mankind has sinned and has fallen. Adam and Eve disobeyed God. And here's the thing. Creatures reproduce after their kind. Adam and Eve disobeyed God. They're now fallen. And then they have kids. What are their kids going to be? Fallen. That's how we are. It's the state that we exist in. And because we're fallen, because we have an inclination to sin, as we disobey, we create pain. The world with destruction and evil and sorrow and all of this in it that we want to shake our fist at God for, He didn't make it, we did. We made the world the way it is. The presence of evil and suffering in the world is a lesson to us about the seriousness of our sin. And the depravity of the human race cannot be overstated. It amazes me that people want to think that we're basically good. Have you read a history book? Don't confuse being nice with being good. We live in a society where politeness and manners and civility has kind of been cultivated, but don't confuse niceness with good. Evil knows how to put on a good act. Most people actually don't sin, not because of goodness, but because of consequences. If you think of the reasons why it's like, I want to do that, and you know you're not supposed to, why don't you? Because you'll get in trouble. Whenever you're a kid, you look at the cookie jar and you think, ooh, but Mama counted the cookies, so she'll know if one's missing, and I don't want to get in trouble, right? That's not because you're such a wonderful little angel who decided, not to take a cookie because it's wrong, just because you didn't want to get in trouble. And that's how the progression goes as we go through life and the different things that we're tempted to do something wrong, and very seldom is our response, no, I want to honor the God of the universe and do what is right. Rather, it is the cost is too high if I get caught. That's kind of how mankind are. We've talked before, the atrocities in history that have been committed by mankind, they're committed by regular folks. Holocaust, slavery, right, the gulags, the genocides in China and Cambodia and Rwanda, those are regular people doing that. That wasn't just some special group of especially dark and evil people from that society. Those are regular people. Abortion, those are regular people doing that. So we were created to have dominion, but we are depraved. And third, there is deliverance. There is deliverance. We will be delivered from sin. Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrates his own love towards us, and that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Right? Any who would believe, whosoever. Put your faith in Christ. Be saved from your sin. By the way, that's one of the reasons that as we look on evil, the one thing we cannot conclude is that it's because God doesn't love us. He's already proven his love to us on the cross. Second, that we are delivered from judgment. Romans 8:18 says, "For I have considered the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared to the glory which shall be revealed in us." With heaven on the horizon, the things that we endure in this life are not fit to be compared. And as this life, as eternity rolls on, and this life is in the rearview mirror growing more and more distant, the pains and the sorrows of this life will grow to be a distant memory as the joys and the glories of heaven proceed on. So yes, the bad stuff is going to continue. Jesus says it's even going to increase. And the end will come. And as we endure all of this, we can be sure that it's not God's doing, it's ours. But there will be a deliverance from it. And so the evil and the pain of this world should not be our focus. It's what we are to overcome. It's not what we are to look at as the defining thing of our experience. It is an obstacle that God has said, bring light into the darkness. So all this bad stuff is going to continue and increase, but are we there yet? I mean, that's the really important question. That's the one you are waiting to get to. You're like, okay, we're talking about end times, end of the age. We're in Matthew 24. I've read that before. I know what it's about, preacher. Are we there yet? That's what everybody wants to know. I remember being in, I don't even know, I may not even been in grade school yet, watching that video where they're talking about microchip technology and the mark of the beast. Here it is, it's coming. Well, that's 30-something years ago. We ain't there yet. I don't know, but there's some people going, I don't know, have you heard how people are getting that chip under their skin where you just kind of wave your hand over the scanner to pay your stuff, right? Okay, hold on. We're not there yet. Right? The mark of the beast is not something that's going to be accidental. Oops, I didn't mean to take that. You're going to know what you're doing when it comes. Everybody wants to know, are we there yet? Here's the thing, I don't think so. I really don't. I could be wrong. Please, Lord Jesus, prove me wrong, come tomorrow. Again, like I said, I don't think we're to the point of every thought of man, only evil continually. And here's the thing, that shouldn't be our primary concern. It's fun to talk about, isn't it? That's one of people's favorite topics. Unfortunately, I find that that's one of those things people are far more concerned about than they are in walking with Christ day to day. I've shared before that when I was working with youth, I would have kids that come up to me like, hey, we should do a study on Revelation. And I'm thinking, you're doing drugs and sleeping with your girlfriend. And you want to talk about end times? That's what's important to you? Got your priorities a little out of whack. When we're not wanting to focus on the day-to-day things of taking up our cross and following after him, we just want to talk about the fun things. And it says that the whole world will be reached, and that has not yet happened. There are still people in this world, entire people groups, who have not heard the gospel. That language barrier hasn't been broken down. That cultural barrier has not been broken down. The geographic barrier has not been broken down. Verse 14, it says, this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. Now, this isn't God just sitting up in heaven with his arms crossed, tapping his foot, going, come on, guys, spread that gospel. He knows when things are happening. It's his time. He's not sitting around waiting on us to fulfill his plan. He fulfills his plan. But the world needs to be reached with the gospel. The Bible says that there will be people in heaven for every tribe, tongue, and nation. Well, there's tribes, tongues, and nations that haven't been reached yet. So mankind created this mess, and God does not protect us from our mess, but he does rescue us out of it. And he rescues us out of it so that we may then become agents of light, agents of love into a dark and broken world. Verse 12, it says that because lawlessness abounds, the love of many will grow cold. But not those who know Christ. What reason would we have for our love to grow cold? Because the world acts like the world? When we know better. Jesus asks in Luke 18:8, when the Son of Man comes, will he really find faith on the earth? I don't think that's just saying, is he going to find you being good little boys and girls? Is he going to find us faithfully doing what we have been called to do? To spread the gospel, yes, but that's not just evangelism, but to also be a light on a hill. To be the salt of the earth, to be shining the gospel light into a world of darkness. Are we going to be a beacon of goodness and light and hope and love in a world desperately needing it as people's love grows cold? Be it we are called to stand up and shine. That's the end of the age. They said, when is this going to happen? He says, oh, this is going to get bad. But the gospel is going to go around the world, and the light of the gospel is going to shine into the world, and the instruments of that gospel is you. That we would be those agents of light and of love and of grace into a world of sin and darkness and hate.
Every time I feel the walls closing, you cover me and breathe life in me again. Lord, though I feel the darkness come, I will not fear, you've ransomed me with blood.